Welcome to the Right Take Podcast, news, ideas, and conversations at the intersection of politics and culture, a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center. I will be your host, Mark Tapson. Welcome back to the Right Take Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Tapson. Thank you for joining me here. I'm back from my pilgrimage to the Holy Land, which I referenced in my last episode. I caught something on the flight back, naturally, that could be a cold or maybe it's COVID, who knows. But in any case, I hope my voice holds up through this episode. Visiting Israel for the first time was an amazing experience, but I'm eager to get back in the saddle, back in the routine, and to get fresh episodes of The Right Take underway. So let's get to it. In a recent CNN special, former President Barack Obama told his interviewer, the anti-Semitic propagandist Christian Amanpour, that he believes watching Fox News or listening to right-wing radio skews facts and makes people fearful of each other. Obama said, quote, "Partly because of where people are getting their information these days, the silo wing of information, if you're watching Fox News or following some right-wing radio host or getting Facebook feeds within the bubble, the reality is different than if you read the New York Times or watch your program," by which he meant Christian Amanpour's program. He goes on to say, quote, "And such fundamentally different facts, or what they think to be facts, and the worldviews are so skewed one direction or another, it's very hard for democracy to work," unquote. He added that misinformation and the constant demonization of the other side of the political fence are making people fearful of each other. Wow, the hypocrisy and projection in that statement are breathtaking, aren't they? Suggesting that Fox News is biased, but that CNN, the New York Times, and other mainstream media outlets are not, takes incredible gall. Suggesting that right-wing media demonize their political opponents and make people fearful, but left-wing media do not, is just mind-boggling gaslighting. Admittedly, hypocrisy and projection are the Democrat way. We know it. The Democrats themselves know it. So does Obama think he can say with a straight face that right-wing media are biased and ideological, but that left-wing media are not? As for the bubble he mentioned, no one lives more in a partisan bubble than a Democrat. I know this for a fact because I used to live in that bubble many years ago when I was a Democrat. I lived in San Francisco. I did not know a single conservative. I worked in the fields of academia and the arts, and I believed that liberal views were normal and right-wing views were abnormal and extremist. It was only when I moved to Los Angeles and began working in Hollywood and accidentally meeting and working with conservatives that it gradually dawned on me that I had even been in a bubble. And so I began questioning everything I had passively and unwittingly bought into. I also gradually realized that because the left dominates the media and all other cultural institutions, Democrats are far less knowledgeable about the right's positions than the other way around. That's a generalization, of course, but one that generally holds true. But Obama wants America to think that it's the right that lives in a bubble fortified by far-right media extremism. While I'm sure there are some on the right who might occupy such a bubble, the problem is far more prevalent on the left, where people are completely incapable of recognizing that a leftist bubble even exists. About the media. In the complete collapse of American trust in institutions of all kinds, especially since the pandemic, there is arguably no institution that has squandered more confidence from the American people than the blatantly biased news media. I'm including Fox News, too, which has lost the trust of true conservatives who know that Fox leans only barely right. They're hardly the radical far-right extremist outlet that the left loves to paint them as, especially with Tucker Carlson gone. Apart from a couple of other conservative voices on the network like Greg Gutfeld, you'd be hard-pressed to make a distinction between Fox and any other mainstream media outlet. So, for Obama to try to gaslight Christian Amanpour's already far-left audience into believing that Fox News and right-wing radio are the source of our current political polarization would be comical if it weren't so outrageously false. It's the leftist domination of the lying, propagandistic mainstream media, including the co-opting of Fox News, that has intentionally fomented the rancorous political polarization of our nation. And about that propaganda and media, on today's episode I'm going to speak with a White House correspondent who happens to be openly Christian and conservative, which is a little atypical for someone in the White House press room. And he has an interesting insider's perspective on the media and its bias and propaganda, and how the White House disseminates lies and manipulates people through a colluding media. So please stay with us here at the intersection of politics and culture. You don't want to miss this conversation. And don't forget to subscribe to The Right Take so that you don't miss any of the important conversations we're having here. Remember, if you like what you hear, please leave a review. It really helps. We'll be right back with my guest after this musical interlude that I never tire of hearing. Don't touch that dial. My guest today at the intersection of politics and culture is Dr. Anthony Harper, Principal White House Correspondent with InterMountain Christian News and the Israel news service Newsreel, exposing and reporting on anti-Semitism and other human rights violations. Dr. Harper is an Air Force veteran and holds a BA in journalism and media studies, but also a PhD in psychology, which I imagine gives him some interesting insights into what goes on in the White House press room. Dr. Harper, welcome to the Right Take podcast.
It's great to join you.
Dr. Harper, tell us about InterMountain Christian News, which can be found online at imcnews.org. How and why did you launch that? What's its mission? What do you cover there? Please fill us in on all that.
Okay, in 2002, it's been in production, so over 20 years. And the reason why I got into this was I was talking with some friends told me about a Christian newspaper association. I learned about the Christian Newspaper Association and talked with the director of that. And he had been hoping that someone would start a Christian newspaper in our Boise, Idaho, Treasure Valley, Idaho area. And so it was an answer to his prayer to see this happen. And it's miraculous that we've been going for over 20 years. And it's the longest running, by the way, Christian newspaper in the entire Intermountain region. So what a miracle to have it going this long. Is in digital form primarily right now, and hoping that we'll be able to get to the support to put it back into regular print production and even expand the production. But the reason for starting this was not only to provide a voice for church people, Christian people in our area, way to connect people, providing a platform for events and so forth, for encouraging other people, and it's been a great opportunity for people to express themselves in this, being the only Christian newspaper, by the way, in our area, to my knowledge. So it has been a wonderful experience overall, very challenging at times, but I had no idea back in 2002 that this would take me to the White House.
Yes. Well, congratulations on 20 years of successful journalism with that outlet. And what about Newsreel News from Israel? Tell us a little bit about that too.
Newsreel is a couple years as far as in production. It is very unique in that there is a web app. Actually, there's an app for your phone. Newsreel.com is the website. It's a very good news source. It has a lot of news from a different parts of the world, by the way, that impact Israel. So they run my news reports from the White House, but I would encourage people to check out that newsreel.com. It's just NEWS, news, and then reel, RAEL in this case, kind of a play on mixing Israel and news, so newsreel.com. And by the way, our news website, Intermountain Christian News, is imcnews.org. People can, of course, do a search Google, Yahoo, whatever, for either one of them, the Intermountain Christian News or Newsreel.
Great. And as you and I were talking about in a phone call earlier, you were in Israel just a month or so ago, the end of May, weren't you? What were you covering there in Jerusalem?
Yes, I was blessed to be in Jerusalem, and I was covering, first of all, the Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast. This is a yearly event in Jerusalem. Many evangelical and there are Jewish people that join in there as well. Anyone that supports Israel. This was held at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Jerusalem. Very nice hotel, by the way. But this was a very special day of a couple days that had guest speakers from different parts of the world. Joel Rosenberg was one of them, but Michelle Bachmann was there. I did an interview with Michelle Bachmann, had interviews with former Knesset member Robert Ilotoff, and had met with the Christian Broadcasting Network reporter Chris Mitchell there. Several interviews that are on our YouTube channel, by the way. We're also on Rumble. People, when they go to our website, imcnews.org, there's a YouTube and a Rumble banner that people can click on for that. And this event was very special for me, being the first one I've attended. The Jerusalem Prayer Breakfast had people that were close. There was one person, Dr. Mike Evans, that's been a good friend with Prime Minister Netanyahu for quite some time. And so he shared his experiences with Prime Minister Netanyahu in the early days. Um, there were just a lot of people that they're very supportive of Israel. They had breakout sessions, different mini sessions on different topics. Joel Rosenberg, a famous author, was there regarding Israel issues, and it was quite an experience, a very blessed experience. And while we were there in Jerusalem, there was a gay pride parade happening, which our hotel was basically, and the people in the hotel weren't able to get to their taxis or whatever for about, the streets were shut down for about 6 to 8 hours on one of the days I was there. But it was a wonderful time. Now, I want to highlight what happened when I first arrived into Israel was at the Ben Gurion airport. I spontaneously started singing the Israeli national anthem, Hatikvah, and there were a crowd of people there that were clapping and singing along with me.
That's great. You do have a bit of a singing and musical background, don't you?
Well, I do. I'm a musician, so in 2018, I received a second undergraduate degree in journalism, media studies within the communication department, and a minor in music. Um, I actually started out in opera and music theater, and I've had a lot of great experiences singing across the nation.
What's the media atmosphere like there in Israel from your experience in May? I mean, or were you able to have? Did you feel like you had easier access to some Israeli political figures than you might have even here in the States because you're sympathetic to Israel, or I don't know what was the your sense of the vibe there in terms of the media atmosphere?
Well, because I've had a very special connection with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, that has really opened up some doors for them trusting in me. And I had interviews with several Israel leaders. At that time, I was trying to get my interview with the Prime Minister, but his staff people didn't have enough time. By the time they heard about my request, they didn't have time to make it happen. I believe that is going to happen. My interview with the Prime Minister on the topic of the rise of anti-Semitism, what's Israel facing right now. But um, I had very special experiences at the Knesset with the interviews, and one really stood out to me was the Knesset member Simcha Rotman, and he is the principal one in the Knesset that is dealing with a judicial reform topic. And we talked about the protests happening in Israel. People may have heard about the protests. I learned that there are billboards around Tel Aviv, around Jerusalem, that were advocating for overthrow of the Netanyahu government, portraying Prime Minister Netanyahu as a dictator. I learned recently the previous prime minister, last name of Olmert, has been leading some protests and was attempting to shut down operations at the Ben Gurion airport. This previous Prime Minister Omert is really causing a lot of problems for the Prime Minister, and there are many others that have been after the Prime Minister on several fronts, accusing him of a lot of things. Kind of reminds me of President Trump's situation, being accused and them being attacked, as far as their character and whatsoever, and so it was very unique experience at the Knesset, not only with the Israel leaders, but I had attended a special event that actually I wish I would have been there a little bit earlier, because the Prime Minister was there for this special group of people. Um, is very is very supportive of Israel, and I just have blinked out just briefly about what that group, that the name of that is, but I do uh, know that people can contact me if they have any questions about this. I have all those interviews on our YouTube channel of these encounters at the Knesset and elsewhere. So it was overall great, and because of the previous prime minister experience, like I said earlier, a lot of trust that I've developed in them. And I, by the way, did actually have a question in a press meeting with Prime Minister Netanyahu at the time, 2016, after the elections, the results for Donald Trump winning the presidential election. I had a press question to the Prime Minister at his annual meeting for journalists, and that question was, what is response to evangelical Christians in America that were very supportive of President Trump, that helped him win? And I said that they were rallied around a certain Jewish scripture, Second Chronicles 7:14, and he responded with his favorite scripture from Jonah. The Second Chronicles 7:14 is the National Day of Prayer verse about prayer and repentance. And then his scripture was related to, that he quoted, was "Be strong and of good courage," from the book of Jonah. He said how much he appreciated the evangelical Christian support, and that all that he's appreciated for all that Christians have done for Israel over the years. It was a very special event. And by the way, that video of me asking that question is on our YouTube channel. If just people just type in my name, Anthony Harper, and Benjamin Netanyahu, several things come up.
Yeah, great. That's great that you had a chance to ask them a question directly. What about being a White House correspondent? How does one go about becoming a White House correspondent? What kinds of qualifications do they require? And how, as an openly Christian news service, did you manage to get assigned as a White House correspondent under Barack Obama, no less?
Well, it is a process that has changed over three administrations. During the Obama time, I started at the White House. My first time was in 2011, in the summer of 2011, going to press meetings. And actually, Obama was in a couple of the press meetings that I attended there. I have never seen President Biden, and he has never attended any of my press meetings. That would be quite a shock if he showed up in a press meeting. But President Obama was very charismatic in many ways, and he engaged people. President Biden is not very good at engaging with the press. He's not as open, um, and and the most entertaining was President Trump. His interactions with the press was quite entertaining, and but getting into the White House was it wasn't as difficult as I thought it would be. I asked my senator from my state, this called the Senator Risch's office. Senator James Risch is a primary, the one in the Senate that is combating anti-Semitism. He's a key player in all Israel and anti-Semitism issues. So his press secretary, his press person, told me about how to get into the White House, and just with an email address, and how the procedure was, and the phone number. And so I just called the White House and asked, what do I need to do to attend the White House press meetings, and they told me I need to, give them proof of where I'm working, a news source. There is a process where you have to go through Secret Service background checks, but you have to submit to them your news website, your contact information, a little bit of a history about your news outlet. And I did that, and I got in fairly easily. But it's contrary to what is happening now with the Biden administration. There was a much more ease for me to get into press meetings back during the Obama administration and Trump administration. But now the Biden administration has made a lot of rules that I didn't have to experience in previous administrations. There's not that transparency that I've heard about from Biden's press people, but I haven't really seen it. As far as the rules for the press, for a hard pass, which is the coveted press pass, I waited almost 12 years to get that. And during the Trump time, they only had one requirement for a hard pass holder. For that coveted press pass, all they had to do was attend 50% of the meetings, of the press meetings. Whereas the current administration, the Biden administration, is putting up a lot more, put more obstacles to jump over. I believe very discriminatory, in that they require a congressional press pass or a Supreme Court press pass in order to renew your White House pass. Neither the Trump administration or the Obama administration required that of me. And I wasn't aware that they ever required it of any of the hard pass holders. So this needs to be dealt with regarding the discriminatory, these demands. And here's one other troublesome issue about press pass access now at the White House. There's a statement in what the White House issued about submitting to more scrutiny by Secret Service, and they would deem whether you or your news source is a threat to the president, vice president, or to the White House complex. Now, because they don't define what risk is, that it could be arbitrarily used to exclude conservative media.
Because it seems like they could use that as an excuse to weed out those journalists who are not ideologically compatible. Is that your sense of it?
That's my sense of it very clearly.
And that requirement was not, you said that requirement was not present in the previous two administrations, Obama and Trump.
It was not. Yeah, very troublesome. What is happening here about the freedom of the press issues, the assault on many constitutional issues that I've witnessed, and regarding the press meetings now, I feel like I'm in a propaganda camp. I know it was that way during the Obama time as well. President Obama was very charismatic, would joke, and he had a lot more energy than the current president.
I imagine during the Obama administration that you were probably surrounded in the press room and elsewhere by members of the media who could probably barely contain their reverence for him as the left's messiah. Did you feel like a little bit of a fish out of water in that context?
Oh, well, I did. And regarding people worshiping as a messiah, I had seen some news stories about people talking about him as a messiah figure. Although this happened during the Trump administration too, because of the way he was very supportive of Israel, more than many other presidents have ever been supportive of. And there was a tendency to kind of see Trump as a messiah type of figure to save Israel. But I was in Israel my first time during the Obama administration, 2013. I went as part of the White House press corps, escorted into the Palestinian headquarters, escorted into a civic auditorium a type of event, public event for Obama at that time, and into the prime minister's residence, some press meetings. So I had a very special experience, and the inside. I'd never been to Ramallah, to the Palestinian headquarters, and and but the Biden administration and President Biden, with his trip to Israel last time, there wasn't that ease of the press for access to his press events, in contrast with Obama when I was there in 2013.
What kinds of questions were you able to ask Obama or his press secretary at the time? And were your questions dealt with to your satisfaction, or were you treated a little bit like a little bit of an irritant, like maybe a thorn in their side? What was your experience in the Obama years?
Well, initially, my first question getting called on, Jay Carney gave me the last question of the day to the Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack. That day went really well. I was really appreciated by other reporters that day. So a super experience. And my question was, in light of the Secretary of Agriculture talking about serious drought in our nation and needing to get cooperation with the Congress to provide relief to the farmers, I asked the question about Governor Perry. And what my question was, what is the president's response to Governor Perry, who had a time of prayer and fasting in these national disasters of drought? And so this elicited a very humorous response from the Secretary of Agriculture. And that being, he said, I pray every night. I get down on my knees and pray every night. And honestly, I would do a rain dance if that would help. And so, because he mentioned a rain dance, the American Atheist Group complained to the White House, "What's this all about?" This reporter, and his question about prayer. And so, the White House, from my understanding, didn't condemn the question. It was just really received very humorously, and the press secretary Jay Carney really I think it was quite funny, but. Um, what is so ironic about this is that they're complaining about the need for rain and serious drought problem. And so when I walk away from the White House after my question, just about an hour and a half to 2 hours, a lightning streak goes across the sky when I start walking away from the White House, and I get drenched in rain for 2.5 hours. And it was not only there, but it was also in New York City at the same time. And so that's more than a coincidence, as the news outlets was talking about. But people can just type in a Google search, uh, Tom Vilsack rain dance question at the White House. It was very funny when he talked about being able to do a rain dance. And so I was very popular that day, with other reporters thanking me for the sound bite. They were giving me high fives, patting me on the back. I was quite popular, and Yahoo News was so excited about this sound bite. So that was one. That was my good experience. I was only called on twice during the Obama administration, and I would say my next question was total the opposite response. I would love to explain what happened there, and that is, I get asked the opportunity to I get called on by Jay Carney to ask a question, and I had heard in the news that President Obama was not very good at referring to the Declaration of Independence that we're endowed by our Creator, that he would skip past the word Creator, not to give any reference to God, giving these God-given these rights of life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. So I thought this is a perfect opportunity for me to bring up this concern. So instead of saying Creator, I said, and a lot of evangelical Christians believe Jesus is a creator, but that's a lot of evangelical belief. But I was going to say that what I did ask was, what is President's response to the Christian churches in America that believe that our rights of life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness come from Jesus, not men. I talked about the moral decline in our nation and about these rights coming from Jesus, not men. And it elicited a angry response. I mean, the look on the press secretary's face, it's almost like he could spit nails. I mean, he was so angry. And this is the world stage at the White House. And I can see in his expression, how dare you ask this type of a question here in the press room? And there was silence, extreme. There was just very special silence in the room. It was really hard to explain. But I don't know if the name of Jesus had ever been brought up in the press room like this in an honorable way. I've heard a lot of curse words regarding God and him as well, taking God's name in vain. But this might have been one of the most unique experiences, bringing this question up in attention. So there's a report in the Blaze, Glenn Beck's news service, did a story about the Jesus question, and whereas the previous question with that had a good response is in the World Net Daily.
And what about during the Trump years? How did that compare with your time during the Obama years?
Well, I had some great experiences during the Trump time. They were really, they treated me really well for a while anyway. I did get called on during the time of the first week of the Trump administration. That was back in January 2017. I got a question. Uh, I think I don't know if it was it wasn't the last question of the day, but to Sean Spicer, the press secretary. And I want to explain about in the press room. There there are 49 seats. There's 7 rows of 7 seats. The names of the different news outlets are engraved at the bottom of those seats. But I'm the underdog, so I don't have there's no name engraved for our news outlet. And so I sit in someone else's seat, prominently on the 3rd row in the center of Sean Spicer's attention. There was a reporter there that was trying to talk me out of sitting there. And she said, "You realize you're sitting in someone's seat." And I said, "Well, I will move if they show up." And I was praying they wouldn't, because this is like a high profile press meeting the first week of the Trump administration. So Sean Spicer points to me, and I had a hard time believing first that it was really me he was calling on. The reporter next to me nudged me and said, "He's calling on you." So I asked my question about this anti Semitic UN agency called UNRWA. My question specifically was, what is the president's response to the misuse of U.S. tax dollars going into a UN agency that is inciting kids to violence against the Jews? What is his response to Knesset members Sharon Haskell, Dr. Elisa Levy, and Yehuda Glick? And so, because of mentioning these Knesset member names, I learned the following day that the phones are ringing off the hook in their offices. But so Sean Spicer said, we don't have a Secretary of State, we don't have things in place to deal with this issue right now. So my question went viral in Jerusalem. The following day, it upset a UN official, this UNRWA official. And by the way, UNRWA, that's pronunciation of UNRWA, stands for the United Nations Relief Works Agency. And this agency was humanitarian when Israel became a nation, 1948, but it quickly became a propaganda place. So in the schools, their textbooks portray the land as Palestine, not Israel. They refer to Israel as the occupier. So fueling this hatred of the Jewish people. And very alarming that these textbooks still have this going on. Their curriculum is a curriculum of hate. And the Biden administration right now is funding that. Whereas after I asked this question, it got the attention of President Trump, and eventually led these investigative journalism experiences on this issue led to President Trump defunding that UN agency over. It was quite the experience, and I think I was on cloud nine that day. That hearing that it went viral, and it was played on primetime television. People can see that on our website by just typing in my name and UNRWA. And the TV channel is at that time was channel 20, I believe. That was the Hebrew channel. So it was quite something.
Excellent. And what about covering the Biden administration from within the White House press room? What has that been like? Especially, again, representing a conservative Christian perspective. What's it like dealing with a White House press propagandist like Karine Jean-Pierre?
Boy, do I have some stories to tell you there. But I forgot to mention, I did briefly mention in the Trump administration, it was going good for me in the Trump administration until I asked a question and reported on the peace plan of him and Jared Kushner. I had an interview with Sarah Huckabee Sanders. Of course, as I had mentioned, I was called by Sean Spicer, had an interview with him and his Deputy Press Secretary, Hogan Gidley. Actually, Sarah Huckabee Sanders was the Deputy Press Secretary when I had an interview with her at the White House. But Hogan Gidley talked about fake news issues in my interview with him. And, I know President Trump had a lot of concerns about fake news. That those two words, fake news, got a lot of attention during his administration. But very alarming that I wasn't treated very well after I reported on the problem with the peace plan. Michelle Bachmann had serious concerns about when this came out, January 28, 2020, and she was trying to warn him of not to support a plan to divide Israel. There was a map showing a Palestinian state in the heartland of Israel. And she said at that time, when he released this plan, things started picking up some more problems for him politically. The COVID virus came out at the same time, I think it was as well. But there were a lot of strange things happening after he supported dividing Israel. I don't think he ever really believed that the Palestinians would agree to this, but nevertheless, it was some attempt to bring some false sense of peace, I think. And the Abraham Accords, I'm convinced, would not have happened if President Trump and Jared Kushner had not proposed this plan. So that's going to sum up, the end of the Trump administration, how things changed the way I was treated there. But the Biden administration, of course, is a lot more. It is anti-Israel right now, even though President Biden says that he's started a task force to combat anti-Semitism. There's a lot of hypocrisy, Mark, in this current administration. I know there's hypocrisy in probably every administration, but when President Biden says, I've started a task force, I'm unique in doing this task force on combating anti-Semitism, but yet he has an anti-Semitic organization on that task force called CARE, which is I believe, the Council on American and Islamic Relations. And not to mention that there's also issues of concerns of the Biden administration funding anti-Semitic organizations like that UNRWA that I'd mentioned, also the Palestinian Authority, the UNESCO, the UN agency. And I want to comment about the Palestinian Authority. They have a pay-for-slay program referred to. People can search on that, but it's in violation of the Taylor Force Act. It doesn't make, and it's not clear to me that he's combating anti-Semitism when he gives all this money to the Palestinian Authority and these other anti-Semitic organizations, and doesn't demand that they clean up their act, that they stop all references of anti-Semitism before they get the money, and no discipline in that if they do it again, that all money's cut off permanently. But yeah, so I'm really seeing a lot of hypocrisy here on the matter of how the Biden administration deals with Israel. Of course, they're making deals with Iran or seeking a deal with Iran. They're not condemning BDS. That's the boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israeli products. And they're not doing what they can to support the restoration of that Jewish cemetery in Vilnius, Lithuania. And I can say, for those that want to know the history of Lithuania and all the anti-Semitism there, there's a website, savevilna.org. And during the Hitler's time, Lithuanian government people killed a lot of Jewish people. For Vilnius, Lithuania used to be majority Jewish at one time, but the Lithuanian government exterminated a lot of them, killed in massive graves in the forests. It is so shocking what happened during that time, and the Russians came in and then moved the graves of the Jewish people, and they built a sports pavilion over the graves of the Jews. So disrespectful. And there's been the Lithuanian government has been wanting to develop another the convention center actually over the graves of this Jewish people, and they're not really protecting it.
You mentioned a moment ago that you had some stories to tell about Corinne Jean-Pierre, and I was wondering if you wanted to share one or two of those.
Well, I would love to. Now, really hot in the news was the Roe v. Wade decision of the Supreme Court. So she canceled the press meetings that day in June of 2022, and I was upset. Other reporters were upset, but I went up to her office and I had a face-to-face confrontation with her. I asked her, "What about a child's right to life? And what is your response to our Christian audience?" And she seemed to turn away in shame. She would not say anything. She walked away from me, and that was it. I've for several times I've yelled out a few questions at the White House. What about a child's right to life? Specifically, one day at the White House with Press Secretary Corinne Jean-Pierre, she was bragging about codifying Roe and to continue killing children and abortion. And so I did yell out. I had felt it so crucial at this time. I yelled out, "What about a child's right to life?" Fox News picked up on that. There's a story about the unnamed reporter. I am the unnamed reporter. People search for Fox News and the unnamed reporter. But Fox News has not allowed me to explain what happened. I mean, as far as the background to all this and why I yelled that question out, no opportunity with Fox News to talk about my confrontation with her on the day of Roe v. Wade. Um, she changed a lot when she became press secretary. As before, when she was deputy press secretary, I could talk with her and I could joke with her, and it seems like all this power went to her head, and she just cuts me off. She doesn't want to meet with me. She doesn't want to talk with me. She's never called on me, and a lot of reporters are really upset with her, for she favors certain reporters, ignores the back row usually, unless it's a famous reporter sitting on the back row. Um, and I think many have wanted to have a mutiny or some sort. I've been there actually in a news reporter protest. I think that the Gateway Pundit did an article about the protests and some other news sources at the White House when I was there, and it has been such a very intense, troublesome time for me, Mark, there with that press secretary. Um, she is very disturbed in many ways. I have a doctorate degree in psychology, so I've made a lot of observations of behavior through the Obama administration, Trump, and this one, and I think it's worthy of a book. But there's some very unique experiences of stirring things up there. But this press secretary is. Go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I know you can't really make a definitive diagnosis without actually having sat down with her and evaluating her as a psychologist would. But as a doctor of psychology, what are the impressions that you have about Corinne Jean Pierre, or in fact, anybody in the current administration that you may have personally interacted with, like, say, Kamala Harris? Has that doctorate given you kind of some insights into uh, these figures that maybe the average person wouldn't have?
Oh, yes, it is. It has been very helpful. I would say narcissism is one trait that I see in her and in President Biden and many there. I see really a state of delusion. It's like they're living in fantasy world. They really can't deal with reality. They're obsessed on several levels. I've been to the the press meeting when the press secretary was dealing with the National Coming Out Month, and she was talking about her personal experiences, with being lesbian and in a relationship, and talking about her mother not able to accept her in this situation, and about how eventually her mother came around to her side, and that wasn't any place in the press room. A lot of the reporters were just really, I think, confused about this. Her using that platform to just reveal all of her personal problems and about this issue, and she just seems to be obsessed with her LGBTQ agenda as well as the President Biden, and I just think she's very disturbed, and it's a really form of mental illness. And I can talk about the history of this topic because I had a couple interviews with some psychiatrists talking about her and President Biden. There is on her
And
YouTube.
you're talking about, sorry, you're talking about Corinne Jean Pierre or Kamala Harris now at this point?
I'm talking about Karine Jean Pierre and Biden and the Harris. I do want to make some comments about Kamala Harris because I've had an encounter with her, but at first about um, the psychiatrist is Dr. Larry Banta. Here recently, people do a search for Dr. Larry Banta and myself, Anthony Harper. That in that interview, he talks about the history of the American Psychiatric Association and how they removed homosexuality from the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. He comments about, and I had talked about the observations I've seen with Biden as far as Parkinson's disease and dementia, but the psychiatrist said that there's clearly something significantly wrong with him. I think a lot of people know that they would at least agree that there's some kind of a dementia going on. Strange behavior of Biden, and I've observed his behavior there with the way he walks across the White House lawn, very stiff. And I've actually seen a Parkinson symptom in him one day when he was involuntarily violently shaking his right arm at a press event. And of course, I've seen him trip and fall down, on times in different videos, Air Force One. But there's one Parkinson's symptom. It's called bradykinesia. Bradykinesia is the slowness of movement in the muscles, and it's very pronounced in his face. People may have observed the way his speech is slurred or sped up. He gets confused, and I had seen this kind of a dementia gaze in a video when he was debating President Trump. When he turned his head, there was this dementia gaze that I've seen in other patients when he turned his head. So there's been overwhelming amount of incidences to for my opinion on that for professionally, but um, so as far as Corinne Jean Pierre, uh, she, as I mentioned, to me there's some sign of mental illness on her part. She has this flickering of her eyelids. I don't know if you or other people have noticed that when she's in the press room. She wears a certain eyeliner or whatever, and she has this nervous behavior. It's like she really can't handle telling the truth, and she's not. She's really trying to hide in many ways. And with Kamala Harris, I had an up close encounter with her in the hallway, an upper press. I was only like foot and a half, 2 feet away from Kamala Harris, and I heard that kind of hyena, that giggle that she had. She's been famous for, and I believe that's a sign of a psychotic problem. Disconnect with reality. She's using this kind of a laughter to deal with stress. She really is hiding a lot. Kamala Harris, Jean Pierre, and President Biden, they're all hiding a lot and very hypocritic. And so that's, from a professional psychological view, that's what I've seen. I think I think the common person can see this behavior easily as well.
This is a question that I ask of some of my guests, and I think you'd be uh, certainly the right person to ask of it, or ask it of. From your perspective in the belly of the beast there in Washington, D.C., do you believe we're in a time of spiritual warfare? And how do you see that playing out in the environment that you work in?
Oh yeah, I would definitely agree that we are in a spiritual warfare. In that, I would say the Biden White House has a war, is involved with a war on God. And I have read David Horowitz's book. I really love that book, Final Battle, How the Next Election Could Be Our Last. And he has a Dark Agenda book, wonderful book about this issue, about a serious impact for America. But it is clearly a spiritual warfare, this war against God, against our Judeo-Christian heritage. I know that David Horowitz sees that very clearly. This assault is I think more than ever before. I have seen, as far as the three administrations at the White House, dramatically just so much worse for the Biden administration because for the first time in the White House, this administration has normalized same-sex marriage. I was at the White House when there was, just actually the day prior to this, I had some arguments with the Deputy Press Secretary, Andrew Bates, regarding same-sex marriage, and he told me the religious community, a majority of the religious community, supports same-sex marriage, and I say no, that's not true. We were arguing about statistics. I would say no, the Mormons, the LDS don't accept this. A lot of evangelical Christians don't accept this. But this administration is, I would say, the most troublesome of any administration I can think of in history. For the fabric of the family has been really abolished in many ways. If you think about the foundation of what people have known for the family, a man and woman in this relationship, and so the Biden administration, the first to undermine all that, and then as well as sanctity of life issues. I know that many of his administrations have supported abortion in some way, but this administration, I think, is more abusive of children than ever before. We've got the child mutilation issue with transgender, surgery. We have how the drugs, the hormones impact children. And what about sex trafficking across the border, or sex trafficking in general? The Biden administration seems to be more anti-child than any administration ever. Also, more anti-marriage and family, and more anti-Israel than any other administration before.
And the abolition of the family is at the very heart of Marxist theory, isn't it?
It is. I think about Hitler's time, about having the child being raised by the government. And that's what I see in the Biden administration. So that the Biden administration, the government, is supposed to have control over the child, and we see that clearly in the attempts of the Biden administration for schools to indoctrinate children with a certain ideology. Of course, we don't have prayer in the schools like we used to. That's been removed a long time ago. But this administration is very destructive to the family, and disrespectful of God. I see just so much hypocrisy on this matter, and President Biden, when he met the Catholic Pope, many people were so upset that the Pope did not discipline him on the issues of communion and so forth. And I had an interview with one of the Catholic priests, Father Frank Pavone, that the Pope defrocked, and he talked about his experience. A very pro-life activist, a priest, and other priests refused to grant communion to President Biden because they say that he's not spiritually qualified to take communion.
Let me circle back for a moment. I sounded like one of the Biden administration's press secretaries there, didn't I, for a moment?
I've heard that phrase before, the Biden
Yes.
administration.
Let me circle back to the issues that you were having with the Biden administration in terms of maintaining your press pass. How do you think that's going to work out? Do you think you'll be able to resolve that? And is there a deadline on that? What's the status of that?
Well, hopefully very soon that there will be a good resolution for this. The deadline is July 31st. My press pass expires July 31st, 2023 here, and very troublesome, by the way. Now, it's just not me, but there are many other reporters that are impacted by this that wouldn't be able to get their hard passes, this coveted press pass, renewed. The Biden administration has demanded that you have a congressional press pass or a Supreme Court press pass. Now, for the Supreme Court press pass, you have to be major. Your focus has to be majorly on covering the Supreme Court. Well, I'm not there to cover the Supreme Court. My news beat is the White House, so that makes it impossible for me to fulfill my White House responsibilities if I had a Supreme Court press pass. Now, as far as the congressional press passes, there are two passes you can get from the Senate side, the Senate press gallery, or the House press gallery. They are inundated right now, Mark, with requests. The White House has not given Congress these gallery press offices enough time to respond by the July 31st deadline. So my hope is that at least on a minimum basis, they would extend 6 months to give Congress the time to process these applications. Now, I have been turned down myself for a congressional House press pass because our news organization is funded by donations, and I see that discriminatory very clearly when they prefer advertiser supported news outlets. Now, I do know that the Guardian is one news source that asks for donations. This has been a popular thing, crowd-funded thing. But my press pass is in jeopardy if I can't meet these deadlines. If they grant that 6 month exemption, that would be a big relief to me and other reporters. I know several reporters that cannot get this congressional press pass.
We will be praying for a positive resolution to that. Dr. Harper, what is the best way for people to keep up with what you're doing and where you're doing it?
Well, we have the website I mentioned, imcnews.org. We're also on Rumble. We have Twitter, Facebook, um, Instagram, as well as, well, actually, the Instagram is not a news thing. That's InterMountain Christian News doesn't really have specific Instagram, but we do have True Social and Getter. Those are the outlets we have right now. People can contact us through our website, imcnews.org, and call our phone number for if they have any questions. There's a giving portal on our website. There's a donate button. People can support good news reporting there at the White House, and we need a continually good voice, Mark, there at the White House that isn't afraid. I would say I have the most challenging questions of any reporter at the White House because of all the human rights issues that I deal with. And it's just not Israel issues on anti-Semitism, and the children's rights. But think about the women's rights in Afghanistan. I have a woman reporter friend she tells me about her being mistreated by the Taliban. The Uyghurs, in the Chinese internment camps. Uyghur people are confiding in me about their family members. One of them, she was taken away from her child, And what's happening in these Uyghur camps, the Chinese internment camps, is that there's forced sterilization, they've told me about, and organ harvesting and rape. The Biden administration only talks about forced labor, but forced sterilization and organ harvesting is so much worse.
Anthony Harper, thank you for your time and your insights today at the Right Take Podcast. Great conversation. Please keep up the courageous work that you're doing.
Well, I will, so help me God.
Just another reminder to subscribe to The Right Take so you don't miss any of the great conversations we're having here. And if you like what you hear, please leave a review. Thank you, and see you next time. The Right Take with Mark Tapson is a project of the David Horowitz Freedom Center and Front Page Magazine. Unauthorized reproduction of this podcast without express written consent is prohibited.